Welcome to the SuperHero Conversations, a podcast saga with innovation leaders who will be at Supernova, the #1 tech innovation event in Benelux, happening in the end of March 2025 in Antwerp, Belgium. And in today's episode, I welcome the guest, Stijn Christiaens.
That's me.
The co-founder of Collibra. Hello, Stijn.
Hey, one of the many, yes.
One of the many, but one of two who has left, who has been here.
Yeah, correct. There's still two of our original 4 or 5 founders that are operational in the company today, 16 years later. Yes, which is quite unique in some ways.
Stijn, I would really like to begin from the first stepping stones. What experiences, maybe people have formed your founder journey? What has influenced you the most?
Well, if we're gonna go, many people, I would say, even over the years, even still today. If I see entrepreneurs, early or late, it doesn't matter. They're still inspirational because their stories are also unique and valuable. But if I go back over the many years, I think for myself, I saw entrepreneurship quite early. When, for example, my father had a computer shop, back in the day when, personal desktops, personal computers were first coming into households. So my father worked at the bank, but then also did the computer shop on the side. And then as a young boy, I would say, had to help in the computer shop, which was very entrepreneurial, right? Because we had to go around in our hometown and really distribute little pamphlets physically in every address in the whole town. It's 20,000 addresses. Just say, hey, there's a new computer shop. You want to buy a computer? Because at that time, no household, or only a very small fraction of households in Belgium had a computer in their home. So that's where I saw entrepreneurship up close very early on, and it was always work. Entrepreneurship is always work. And similarly for my mother, on my mother's side, so she's a nurse, but then outside of her nursing, she also was teaching and organizing all sorts of things. So there was a lot of entrepreneurial activity at home, I would say. And then I also started some of my own things. This is in the day of website making, for example. But we wanted to go beyond regular websites and really make web applications, right? Where people could, order or do things for the business. And then I saw entrepreneurship continuing on. In my first job that I did was a small Belgian software firm run by 2 brothers. So I saw one form of entrepreneurship there. And then we went to the university where I worked, the VUB. And, I didn't see entrepreneurship there necessarily in the university, but they had a whole department to do technology transfer to help researchers, postdocs and whatnot, to take their IP, their knowledge, and transfer it into industry. And there was a whole slew of entrepreneurs that we were put in contact with through that process as well. For example, people who had run the Belgian iMinds at that time. So we saw a whole bunch of entrepreneurs there and a lot of stories. And like I said, still to this day, so there's many inspirational stories. And of course, you also have the in software, which is our business, you have the traditional examples of entrepreneurship, the Bill Gateses, the Steve Jobs, the Silicon Valley heroes, if you will. But also their special versions like Steve Ballmer and whatnot. The whole plethora of entrepreneurs, and to this today, you have many new generations as well. Yeah, I'm going a bit on a tangent.
It's okay.
I don't know if that's what you're trying to do.
Yes.
Here. I feel myself drifting a little bit.
That's
Is that what you're hoping to get?
That's exactly what we need. But I think it's really interesting to see how often, early experiences in childhood, seeing the dad opening up the computer shop alongside his job.
Yeah.
Mom doing, different various projects on the side.
Yeah.
I do believe those kind of experiences really form the first perception of the world, that you can actually build something yourself and you do not need to work for somebody. I believe it's fascinating. So let's move on to Collibra. People who are not in the data field, not in the data bubble, I think there's quite a lot. It becomes less and less people who do not know about it. But if you were to explain what Collibra does for a 6-year-old, how would you explain it?
Yeah, I don't know if I'll be successful for a 6-year-old because I found that, our niche as to what we do in data, and data is already, a mysterious subject for many people in the world today, but that will change over the next decades for sure. But I found it's already hard to explain what we do, even in our niche, so let alone to a 6-year-old. But if I,
if you would try.
Yeah, let's try for the 6-year-old, right? So let's say we meet the 6-year-old and they want to play with various toys like Lego or dolls or action figures or other sort of puzzles. And then we would ask, well, what do you want to play with? And they would say, I want to play with Legos, for example. And I would say, okay, where are your Legos? And then they don't know. Like, well, who's responsible for putting your Legos away? Or maybe who helped you sort the Legos, by blocks? You can easily find them and put together the little castle you want to build. And then through those questions, they would come up with the answer like, well, I'm responsible for putting it away. Or, well, last time we sorted it together, and by sorting it, now it's easier for me to build a castle following the instructions. So I'd make it a little game like this to help them understand about responsibility, to help them understand about organization, to help them understand about process. These are all things that are relevant to data as well. For example, when I meet customers and I want to explain to them what Collibra does, I just ask them, well, I bet you it's easier for you to buy a book online than it is for you to find your own data in your own organization. And then you see people think, yeah, well, how would I even start looking for data in my own organization? How would I buy a book? If I buy a book online, I go to Amazon or Bol or what have you. But if I go for data in my own company, I'm going to ask Bob or Mary. You see them starting to think about the colleagues that they will pester to get the data, right? And that's the problem that we solve for large organizations today, which is to give them a place to start their search for data in the organization. And then when they have that place to search for data, like a catalog of data, if you will, then the next question comes, well, I want to get this data, customer data or financial data or product data or engineering data, whatever data it is in the organization. The next question comes is, well, who's responsible for this data? Who do I ask if I actually can get access to this data and whether I can get access for this purpose? Like maybe I cannot use employee data for marketing purposes, right? So you get into the topic of responsibility. And these are all sorts of topics that Collibra solves for those large organizations. But typically when you explain what we do, we start with the little, well, where do you start looking for your data in the first place?
Okay, so let's kind of stick with the Lego example. So we have this Lego bricks that represent data, the various kind of bricks and data sets. If continuing with the child example, so where the Lego bricks are stored, how they are sorted, but you don't really know how to access them if you're not the owner of this data. Am I correct? So Collibra solves the kind of the pathway of finding the right Lego bricks to build the castle that you need.
Exactly. So what happens in most organizations today, and this has been happening for multiple decades already, they do invest in data. Actually, they do invest a lot in data. But the investments that organizations do in data are typically technology investments, as in more places to put my data in, more places to move my data around, or more ways to get pretty pictures out of the data. And what they often forget to do, large organizations, is that they're not really caring for the data itself, and they're not really caring to, educate, if you will, or organize their people how to care for that data. So if we take the Lego blocks example, you have to sort of imagine that our whole office floor that we're in is full of Lego blocks, right? And maybe the room we're in is the Databricks room. So there are some Lego blocks in the Databricks room. And then another room is going to be the Snowflake room. And there's a BigQuery room and a Microsoft Azure room. And there's an AWS Redshift room. And there's, a big town hall of SAP somewhere. So the whole floor has Lego blocks, data in them. They're all just chunked into different pieces. And more importantly, you don't know which of the rooms have which pieces. But now you're still asked to build a castle. So one of the things that Collibra helps you do, we're not going to move any of those blocks around, right? All of the blocks and all of the shapes and sizes, they can stay in the rooms that they're at. But we're just going to identify, okay, which blocks do we have in which of those rooms, which of those systems? And maybe which people move those blocks around between the different rooms, and in which data pipelines do they move those around, right? And how often does that move happen, and which quality controls are applied, and who's responsible for checking those quality controls? So Collibra essentially identifies for you what Lego blocks do you have in which of those rooms, and who are the people who have responsibilities or should have responsibilities around each of those Lego blocks. So that somebody comes in and says, I want to build a castle of this type, then we can say, well, you have to go to your Databricks room for X and to your BigQuery room for Y, and then go to the SAP town hall to get this, and then you can put it all together.
I think that's a perfect explanation. Yeah. And I believe that's, I'll be honest with you, I did not ask this for a 6-year-old. I asked it for myself so I could understand it.
Well, we're all 6-year-olds inside.
So you define Collibra as a category creation company. So there was no such category before you created Collibra. My question is, we see examples of large social media that were not intended to become the category creation or the category defining players.
Yeah.
Do you think that to create such a company, you need to have the vision of the world transformation from the day one, or you think that the company of the size of the category creation is the result of many pivots that lead up to the creation of such a company?
So I would say it's really important that as a founding team, that you're all on the same page about what type of company you're going to make, right? Because you are going to commit, not 1 or 2 or 3, but rather 10 years of your life to the type of company. So if you say, well, I'm going to build a global software company that category creates versus, well, I'm going to create a Benelux version of Spotify, it's different types of companies that you're creating, right? And what is very important is that as a founding team, you're in full alignment, looking each other in the eye as to say, well, what journey are we going to set out on, right? Because it's going to be your 10-year journey. And if one person believes we're going to build this type of company, and the other person's like, yeah, I agree, but then you're thinking I'm going to build this type of company, that's going to bring a big conflict down the line, because your strategies to build those types of companies are significantly different. With respect to the category creation company, this is something that, maybe initially we didn't set out to do as such, but we also did see the opportunity arise in the market as we were in market, right? We started in 2008. So you're in the market, you're doing trade shows, you're speaking with analysts, customers, prospects, peers, partners, what have you, right? So you're learning the market. And I do believe that to make a decision to make a category creation strategy, there needs to be this opportunity in the market. For example, you can't say, okay, I'm going to build a category creation company for Instagram if Instagram and photo sharing, social media already exists. Then you're not category creating anymore, then you're category following, like you're a second generation. So I think you have to have the opportunity in the market to do a category creation company. And this is about timing, right? So you have to see early warning signs that there's going to be some big shift happening. For example, in AI, there's a lot of category creation companies that are being built over the last 2 years already. But a few years down the line, there's going to be a whole bunch of other AI companies that are no longer category creating, that are just going to be category following to the previous ones.
So did you know that you will become the category creation company from day one in 2008? Or you had this vision embedded later on in your lifetime?
Well, what we wanted to do was build a global software company in enterprise software. So that's sort of what, as founders, we set out on. I think what we did do is we had to shift a little bit, right? Because our original position that we started out with was semantic data integration. And then we shifted that to data governance. And it's in that shift that we identified the opportunity for the category creation strategy. So we didn't originally set out with the category creation, but we saw that we had the opportunity to do it at a certain point in time. Let's say somewhere between 2009, 2010, that's when we started spotting that opportunity.
And if you're thinking about pivoting, and I think it's a word that is being overused many times, but a startup needs to pivot. And do you think that there is a thin line between not pushing hard enough, not doing enough work, and not switching fast enough? How do you find this equilibrium? How do you find this balance?
I think it's a very good question. You have to sort of imagine, when I hear the word pivot, for example, I think of a few things, right? You think of the Silicon Valley Handbook, literally, from the TV series. You have to pivot. I don't think that's necessarily true. And second, I think of a ballerina, right? Because they do pivots and it looks like a beautiful and elegant, but also very fasting. And I don't think it's that at all when it comes to pivoting. I would argue that you want to pivot as little as possible because the way that we've experienced the pivot is that it's actually a long process with a lot of complications and conflicts along the way. So I'll elaborate, right? So you start out with a certain position and then you are looking at this position and you're different people getting different perspectives on the market, right? So one person goes to see this customer, the other person of the founding team goes to this trade show, another person talks to those analysts, etc. So everybody has a different perspective. And one person might come back and say, oh, this is great. This is totally going to work. And the other person might come back from something else and like, oh, this is absolutely not going to work. Now, obviously, who's right or who's wrong, nobody knows, because you're also operating in the very early stages in some sort of fog of war, right? You don't have metrics yet. You don't have traction yet. So nobody really knows through the fog of war, well, what is it now? But what really matters, and this is the process of pivot, this is the practice of the ballerina rather, is that you do manage to bring those perspectives together, and you do manage to align those perspectives to get a maximum visibility in that fog of war, which means that you have to bring them together and you have to go into the conflict, right? As a founders or as a management team, you have to be able to, understand each other deeply, have conflict with each other, but also, of course, resolve the conflict. I'm not saying you all have to agree, like everybody's changing their mind, but you have to learn from the conflict. Like, what are we actually learning about the fog of war around us? And then that goes on for weeks, months, quarters, depending on the various activities that are ongoing. Like, for example, if you're in a sales cycle with a large organization, you're looking at multiple months or quarters that go by, right? So that's months or quarters where one person says it's going well or the other person says it's not going well. So it takes some time. The answer doesn't come like this. And then you come to the second point, which is at a certain point in time, you agree, well, your original position or project or widget or whatever it was that you're doing, go-to-market strategy, whatever it is, okay, you're coming to the point, okay, it's not working, right? So now you are in front of the next challenge of the pivot, which is, okay, if this is not working, then what will, right? Because it's not as if this new, by identifying what didn't work, you don't necessarily know what will work, right? But now you're further down the line, right? So your runway is shorter. Plus you have to make another bet. Okay, let's change the strategy. Let's change the widget. Let's change the go-to-market, whatever it is. And to what else are we going to change it? And how much time do we have left to make that successful? And how will we know that this will be successful? So it's like after the pivot is a bigger bet than before the pivot.
So to summarize, the first point, conflict, this constructive conflict is good.
It's necessary.
It's mandatory.
Yeah.
And the second point, if you would summarize, it's a kind of a what will you actually do after pivoting? What is the concrete plan, to go further down the line?
What do you pivot to? Yeah, indeed. And there, let's close that up with the quote. I think it's from Horowitz in his book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things. And I think therein they say you have to have strong opinions, but loosely held. Right? So you have to be a little bit stubborn about your idea, like we're going to do it this way or we're going to build that widget. But you also have to be open enough that you're willing to change your mind if the reality hits you in the face that you're going in the wrong direction. And I do see that a lot, that the stubbornness is often present, but the other part isn't. So people...
And vice versa.
Yeah. But I see the stubborn part more. So the people believe in their own right, and then even the reality hitting them in the face cannot change their ways. And then they're just, it's like riding into a wall with your eyes open.
Yes. I think it's a really nice quote. Strong opinions, but loosely held.
Yeah.
I think it's a motto of mine from now on.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Collibra's journey. I would ask you about the hardest and the happiest moments of your journey as the founder of Collibra.
The hardest and the happiest.
Yes.
Well,
if it's one thing, maybe it can be hard and happy at the same time.
Oh yeah, well, those do exist because you know that the founder's journey is a very emotional roller coaster, right? Within the same hour, even sometimes you might have a very high, and as in, okay, we have a next progression with this customer in the sales cycle, or with an investor, or with a product thing that goes. So it's like super happy, but at the same moment, there might, in the same hour, there might be a bug or an employee is leaving or what have you, and then you're very down, right? So if you add all of that up, then I have to think a little bit about what is the happiest and hardest, because it's been 16 years of those. I think most of the hardest have to do with change, I would say. That's change of the organization, but also change of your own role, for example. Those are hardest because they involve changing yourself. And then the happiest, I think the happiest moments for me personally always have to do with seeing the talent in our company really physically together, working or having fun. But really seeing a whole bunch of smart, talented people collaborating on this topic to progress it, and also having fun along the way. Those are the happiest moments. And then the hardest, I would say, all have to do with a change, and then specifically change of the self.
So you would say that your switch from first, I believe, the operations officer to technical officer, then to chief data officer, what was the hardest kind of switch in your role?
Well, that's just one example of the change, right? So I've had role changes, but even within the same role, there were also changes of the size of the organization. So it could be the same role, but the organization is different. And it can also be the geography that's different. For example, because I've operated out of Brussels, but also out of New York, and also on the road. So I think for me, the hardest year of my life was the change from Brussels to New York. Let me elaborate on that a little bit, because it's partially hard because I made it hard for myself also. So for the first 5 years of Collibra, there was a lot of prospecting in my life, in the sense that I would be away from home more than I was home. So in that sense, I was already present in other markets, for example, in the United States. But it would be because our capital resources were very slim in the beginning. We would do it on a shoestring budget. So, you do a trade show, and then you'd stay there for 1 week or 2 weeks in a motel room sharing or something like this. So, it's not a luxurious situation at all. But that's fine. But if you add that up over time, it becomes a big pressure also on your personal life. So in 2014, then I moved from Brussels to New York, and my wife moved along with me. But here's why that year was so hard for me. One, you're faced with a challenge in the time zone. So you don't just have to work with Europe, because you just left your team in Europe, if you will, but now you're in the New York East Coast time zone, right? So you can start early, and then you can start going long, because after you work with Europe, you continue your business day with New York, the East Coast, and then goes into the West Coast, because they go until 8 or 9 New York time. That's 5 or 6 Pacific time. So you can have a very long working day. And then, as an entrepreneur, you're often opportunistic and a little bit silly, at least I am. So then I realized, 8 or 9 p.m. New York time, now Europe is closed and America is closed, but Asia Pacific is opening. So, 8 or 9 p.m. is 8 or 9 a.m. for Australia. So I was like, okay, I can continue working. This is great. It's a little bit silly, So there's that silliness, the opportunistic entrepreneur's brain who sees opportunities everywhere, but doesn't always think about all the logistical consequences to themselves, but also to the organization sometimes. And then I was also faced with the challenge of multiple jobs, really. So, there's the job title, but then you have the responsibilities, and they added up to really doing multiple jobs at the same time. So that was hard. And on top of it, this is also when we started to get traction in the United States. So you have to imagine, before you get traction, work is hard because you're trying to push a boulder uphill and nobody's interested. But afterwards, it's not as if the boulder goes downhill, but it sort of starts rolling on its own. Maybe people are pulling on it. There's market demand. Right? Well, then you have a lot of work, because it's like a lot of positive work because you have to keep up with the demand, right? So that takes effort too. So I think that year in my life was hard for all of those reasons. And then, quite frankly speaking, I also forgot my home situation in that year. So I didn't even reflect on the fact as to how that move impacted my wife's situation, who was taken away from her hobbies, her social network, and working at to sort of rebuild her life in a whole new city, in a whole new country. I didn't even consider that at that time, which is even stupider and harder. But I was we were fortunate to make it through the year.
So to all of the founders or people wanting to become a founder, it's not an easy journey. It's not just you get money from the VCs, you fly on private jets, stay in luxurious hotels in New York. It's much harder than that.
Yeah, totally. I mean, there's this notion that has started to exist, I believe, in the market, almost like a romantic idea about entrepreneurship. I think that's very dangerous because I don't think entrepreneurship is for everyone. The first years are typically very hard and very uncertain. So you have to be able to go through the storm for a little while without necessarily knowing what the outcome is going to be. You have to be really almost intrinsically motivated because otherwise, how will you be ready for that rain and that wind in your face?
Fantastic. So take notes, all of the entrepreneurs listening to us. Let's talk about the operations inside Collibra. Maybe you could tell us what is the stage of the company now? What are your main kind of focus points? What are you trying to achieve now? What's your kind of development process along the journey?
Maybe can I add one more thing on the previous thing?
Yes.
Right, because I do want to say the romantic notion of the entrepreneur is a little bit of an illusion, but I do recommend start.
Okay.
Right, so people start. Now back to the question. You said, where are we with Collibra today? What's next?
Yes, how many people you have now? What are your main kind of metrics?
So Collibra today is about 1,000 people, give or take. I don't know the exact number by heart. But you also have to look at the lens of Collibra through change. Right, so only a few years ago, we would have been 500 people. And then only a year before that, 1 or 2 years, we would have been 250 people. So sometimes at Collibra, it's always like every year you're looking at a different company because of the growth, right? And because of the opportunity in the market. You're opening a new market, you're starting a new product, what have you. And today I would say that many of the things that we are measured on are very traditional for the B2B SaaS industry, for enterprise software and even beyond enterprise. So measurements for us would be very similar to measurements you would find on public companies, for example. Right? So they're going to look at your ARR, your growth of your ARR. They're going to look at your NDR. They're going to look at a whole bunch of those metrics that you'll find on all the supernova workshops, I'm sure.
Let's talk about engineers, because usually they're, together with salespeople, they're the driving force behind every company. And it's often hard to measure such a creative job as an engineer. You cannot objectively say that you worked 1 hour and produced this result, or you produced this result and worked X amounts of hours. So what's your take? What is the most objective way to measure the performance of developers?
By measuring their lines of code. No, that's a joke, of course, right? I would say it varies over the years, depending on the stage that you're at, right? So in the beginning days of Collibra, the engineers were us. So how do you measure yourself versus then finding some traction. How do you measure then? Whereas maybe where we are today and what is important to measure now. So in the early days, measuring our engineering capability or our innovation capability would be around flexibility rather, right? Because let's say there's 10 features. You don't really know which of the 10 are the most important to secure the customer. And the customer doesn't know either. So in that sense, you need maybe more flexibility in the earlier days because you're still making those first customers, right? So you want to be able to test a number of features and ideas with them. Some of them maybe are still in mock-up stage. Some of them are just an idea on a piece of paper or a slide. Some of them are in a prototype. Some of them are maybe more coded out further and a little bit deeper. But you want to have a good mix of those so you can test various things because you're both searching for that first, product market fit almost. So you need some flexibility there. And I would say you want to measure on that flexibility. You want to measure on that agility. Whereas then when you start finding the first bunch of customers, the first traction, now you want to maybe focus more on things that are related to this, the early success of that customer, right? So how easy is it to install or set up? How quickly can you deliver at the customer side? So maybe you want to have measurements related to that, right? So you want to get some customers live, you want to have some successes because they will be your stepping stone for the next ones. Where we are today as an organization, it's very different from when we started. I'll give you an example. When we started, we had on-premise software. This is 2008, remember? So you would have a Postgres database and a Tomcat application server thingy. And then around the 2014-ish era, we had to do a whole shift into the cloud. So today we run our data intelligence cloud, or at the Collibra platform, as we call it. So today, metrics around our engineering or an innovation capability have a lot to do with, security, have a lot to do with reliability, with predictability, but also with innovation, like number of features or new features. But what good is a new feature for us if we can't roll it out to the whole customer base? So then it's not valuable, right? So it's very different metrics, flexibility to, more enterprise for a big customer base today. But you have to have a big mix because, technology never stops. So for example, the AI disruption sort of forced us also to relook how and where are we going to innovate with this new topic. And then you need to have processes and metrics around that too.
Mm-hmm. So you would say that the best way to measure the engineers is to look how much actual value do they bring into the product of the company?
I would say that the way that you measure the engineering capability really depends on your context, your stage, your product, your industry, and so on and so forth. So I think you really have to look at it within your context specifically.
Okay. And the second part of the driving force behind the company, the salespeople, I think you have this interesting mix of the both views, of the more technical view of the company, but also the sales. You mentioned that you've been on the road quite a lot, talking with a perspective, staying in motels. So let's talk about sales. I believe it's a fascinating field that it barely has changed since the last century. You have a person that talks a lot and that talks nicely to a person that probably wants the software, and a lot of the sales are done now by relationships. Could you tell me how are sales done now, B2B sales done now in Collibra, and what do you think is the best way to do them for the starting companies?
Well, again, it varies on your type of business, right? Because remember, what we do is a class of software called enterprise software. So you're typically dealing with large organizations.
Yes, let's talk about that.
Multiple tens of thousands or even more people. The way you sell to an organization like this is fundamentally different from the way that you sell to a 50-person organization, for example. I mean, just on decision speed alone, one will move faster than the other. But also, for example, even if the decision is made, the process by which they onboard a new vendor is very different in both cases, right? So your organization has to be adjusted from that, including in the go-to-market activity. And when it comes to sales, I think it always, you mention a person who talks nicely and talks a lot. I would actually turn that around a little bit. And I would rather say in enterprise software, it's good if you listen a lot. Because in the end, I've made this mistake, for example, as a sales engineer. They have something called demo barfing. Right? So you're so infatuated with your own product and all its 99 features, you just want to demonstrate all of them. And before you know it, you've filled the whole hour just with a non-stop stream of words. That's the worst thing you can do. The most important thing you can do is, acknowledge the stakeholders around the room, try to identify, who is an influencer in this process, who is a decision maker, who are gatekeepers maybe even, and what are they looking for? They might be looking for some technicality in your product, but they might also just be looking to look at your solution as a way to make a career movement in the organization. So what are they looking for? And in that sense, more than talking, it's about listening, right? And really understanding what is the need of the organization, but also the need of the individual. And on the basis of identifying that need and validating it by asking a follow-up question, then you can actually start talking about your product, your benefits, your differentiator, your features, whatever it is. So you would then do a little demo specific to what they're looking for, rather than throw the kitchen sink at the wall and hope something sticks. But that's at the people level, right? So if you then extrapolate to the organizational level, there's all sorts of factors that come into play. I mean, you have to have security checks. You have to fill out 1,000-question RFPs. You have to do demos and POCs. You have to have solution architectures. You have to explain how you fit into the ecosystem. They're large enterprises, so you have to give them a view of how you're going to work with the future, while also recognizing that part of their infrastructure is still in the past. And they'll always live on that balance. So how are you going to deal with it? And on top of that, I would also say it's not just the sellers or the account managers or the account owners or the sales engineers, but you also have to look at the marketing function in there. My argument is always that if your organization has a good marketing function, for example, good product marketing, which is to say, how do you translate the features of your product into benefits for the customer? I think that is a very powerful instrument in your go-to-marketing as well.
I think that's a really nice insight. To do sales better, listen rather than talk. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, it's the groundwork. It's 101. So follow up. Just follow up.
Follow up. Your company deals a lot with data protection rules, regulations. There is a notion within the European founders that Europe is highly overregulated, and it probably is. What's your take, your view? If you could change one thing that is stopping Collibra from becoming even a more successful company within the EU regulatory field, what would you change?
Well, first of all, I would say that not all regulation is bad, right? You have to think about regulation, rules, and lawmaking as a way to care for the citizens of a geography or a nation, because private industry, startups, small or large organizations don't always think about their externalities. So if nobody is there to protect the citizens from the things that the organization doesn't care about, it's us, the people, who suffer from that. So I would say not all regulation is bad, and not all regulation slows down business. Some of it is actually meant to provide guardrails within which business has the speed to operate. And I'll give you an example on the data front, right? So if there was zero regulation for data, we would be in a lot of trouble, right? Because then your data, the doom scrolling you do every day, that behavioral data pattern that comes out of it, would allow an organization or even an individual, if they can get access to that data, to make forecasts about your emotional or your psychological state. And the prediction might be incorrect or 60% correct. Doesn't matter. What matters is, can they do it, and what are they doing with it? Like maybe they're increasing your insurance premium and you don't know, right? Or maybe they're rejecting your mortgage application and you don't know that they're doing that on the basis of data. So because data has been cared for more at the technology level rather than at the content level, the data itself, there's a lot of law and rulemaking, but also norms and behaviors that are missing in society, but also in organizations. So that's bad for us as individuals, potentially, right? Because you don't want maybe your employers to have access to your health data, right? That would not be good. It even goes into national security matters, right? So you have examples recently, for example, of people using Strava, that running app, and they were running around, doing just their jog and tracking their data. But if military personnel does this around a certain site, and a third party can get access to this data, now all of a sudden that becomes a bigger sort of problem, right? So not having regulation around some of these things is not only a personal problem, but potentially a national security issue. So in that sense, some of these regulations are really necessary. What I do believe is that regulation needs to be iterated upon, right? Because if you look at GDPR, for example, the big privacy regulation in 2016, which, by the way, spun off over 200 privacy regulations worldwide. People complain about Europe and regulation, but for example, on the basis of GDPR and that privacy awareness, the United States, they're more reluctant to have regulation at the federal level, but typically they do their regulation at the state level. So you'll find various privacy-related regulations at the state level, which also don't necessarily make it easy for certain businesses to do things. It's not just a Europe problem, it's a general problem of bureaucracy, where I believe it has to iterate itself better with the reality that they impose on organizations, business, and people. And whether their regulation is having the intended effect. For example, the intended effect of GDPR was data protection, was data privacy, to protect the privacy of the individuals. Because, if, as we just discussed, if your data gets in the wrong hands, somebody can hold power over you without you even knowing, right? And that is not good. That is the opposite of data privacy. And I think what GDPR did is it created a lot of awareness, but it also created a lot of useless outputs. For example, the eye rolling that we all do when we go on a website and we have to click the so many it, check the box for the cookies. Everybody just checks the boxes, right? And the boxes are often with dark patterns made so that you're checking authorize all anyways, right? Because we just want to get away from. So did that really help with the outcome? Not necessarily. But what GDPR had is as its intent, and some of that has been successful, and as they iterate the regulation, it will become even more successful, is to make these organizations aware that how they care about their data assets or how they not care about these data assets guarantees that there is privacy or guarantees that there is going to be a lack of privacy. Because if we look at data like the Lego blocks example all over that we discussed earlier, then you and I both know that if you don't put some controls around this, if you don't put some process around this, then somebody's going to come into a meeting room and steal some of your Lego blocks and you won't even know. Right? So I would say that Europe has a lot of regulations, true. Not all regulations are bad. And if anything, they need to iterate the regulation more to see if it's producing its intended effects or if it's maybe costing more than it is delivering.
Okay. For us, the regular people, not data protection aware people, we know about GDPR and all of those kind of more general laws, but how can we as consumers of the doom scrolling, consumers of the internet AI, how can we protect our data?
Well, I think it starts by awareness, right? So first of all, you have to not discard, but I don't have anything to hide, right? So, or my privacy is already gone because, I can't fight against the apps or the technology that I use. So it starts by the awareness of not discarding it. Everybody has data privacy needs. It's a fundamental right. Because again, if you have no data privacy, that means somebody else holds control over you beyond what is acceptable. And then very bad things can happen. In the end, totalitarian regimes are a good example of this, right? So, so I think it starts with the awareness, and then it starts with education, right? So you become aware that this is necessary. It's important for your own safety, for your own health. And then you try to educate, like, how can I protect myself, right? Well, maybe one type of phone is safer than another type of phone. Maybe one type of app is safer than another type of app. At least that you become a little bit more aware as to what you're exhausting, right? And what you're sharing. I think in that sense, people learn when new technologies come. When social media came and Facebook and whatnot and YouTube, people started sharing. It's like, let's share. But then they also started learning, well, maybe some things we shouldn't share, right? You don't put videos of an internal meeting on YouTube for everyone to see, right? You put controls on it. Maybe you don't post pictures of your family and your kids for all the wide web to see, right? You put controls out of it because otherwise you're exposing yourself to risk. So you start building it into your habits. And that's when I think proper lawmaking is necessary, also in society, but also in organizations. So let's say you join a company and you say, okay, you notice that they're doing something which looks improper with data. Somebody's just taking a spreadsheet with financial data and putting it on a USB stick, for example, and being very sloppy on the train where they leave the USB stick, for example. That's bad behavior. So you can identify that and call that out. But also bad practices that go against certain ethics and norms, where you say, okay, we have a lot of data. Let's say you work in a social media company and you are working in data and you say, okay, I have access to people's personal messages. Is that the right thing to do? Is that the wrong thing to do? That doesn't seem right. Right? Why would I, as a data engineer in a social media company, have access to the contents of your potentially private messages, right? What about encryption? But then, having access to them is one thing. You can call it out. Then it also depends on how the organization deals with it. The organization might say, well, it's fine. We're going to mine all those private messages and we're going to use it to train an AI model that will change the world. Well, is that the right thing to do? Is that a legal thing to do? Is that an ethical thing to do? So I think it starts with that whole chain of thought. Then it ultimately starts with awareness about how data is an important asset. And, for ourselves, for our family, for our coworkers, for society as a whole, we have to care about it.
Let's talk about the future of data, not only your personal data, but with AI, we can see that big data plays a huge role. You actually, companies fight for the data.
Yeah.
That's why, Reddit became such a important asset, because there you can find real, unfiltered data from the people with emotions. Let's talk about the future. What is your prediction? What will happen in the data field, big data field, with the data that you work with by 2050? Let's take 25 years. I know it's a huge amount of years, but what is your vision for the future?
25 years is a long time, from 2025 to 2050. And it's hard because inevitably you'll see at least 2 or 3 other disruptions, which almost make it impossible to peer around the corner, because they're literally disruptions, right? There was a big AI disruption only 2 years ago, and we're still looking around the corner as to how that will affect our technology and our society with that disruption. So if you talk 25 years old, we're going to go into science fiction books, right? But the example of Reddit that you gave, I think, is quite an interesting one, because to me, that really proves that data is becoming an asset. There is already research, if you go back 10 or 20 years, there's a book called Infonomics. And this talks about how data should be an asset that organizations put on their books, just like financial assets, so that they can actually measure it and meter it and whatnot. And that is now becoming reality. I mean, 20 years ago, they talked about it and they made formulas for it and so on and so forth. But you're only now seeing that become a reality through that Reddit example, because Reddit now sells for $60 million per year their data to OpenAI, I believe, so that OpenAI can continue to keep its model current and up to date, which is what they need to do. So data is literally becoming an asset on the books, and I think that will happen for all organizations over time. This takes a while, so take at least a good 10 years of your 25 years. You're gonna see organizations slowly start to adopt to that new asset. And the reason why I'm saying that is because we've seen that happen over these 16 years at Collibra. And it takes a while for organizations to do that. It took a while for organizations to put IT assets, right? The mobile phone, the desktop, the computer, all the way back to the mainframe. It always takes a while for organizations to digest this new thing, because we as people have a speed of change, and our organizations have a speed of change because of us, right? But to your point about the future, if you look at it, the future will definitely have more data. If you look at the last 2 decades, we've gotten more data, right? We're feeding off mobile data continuously from our phones. There's sensors in there. For example, the Bluetooth sensor in there. Most people don't know that, but it has a limited radius, right? So it only operates on a few meters. So that means that on the basis of Bluetooth data, I know that you are nearby me. And if you're always near the same people, well, maybe these are your coworkers or your friends or your family. So just on the basis of Bluetooth data, which seems innocent, you can make very strong inferences. But that's just at the start, right? What we're now seeing is we're seeing the glasses come, the wearables, from the watch, which has all sorts of sensors in there that tell you about your biometrics in a very detailed thing. Then you have the VR glasses, which can measure your eyeballs, right? So yeah, on a survey, you can lie, right? You can say, are you happy or sad? Happy, sad, you lie. But these new data collection devices that we wear on our skin and that look at our eyeballs, they can actually tell us on a millisecond basis whether you are really happy or really sad, because they can measure it from the reactions that your body exhausts. So I think we'll see more data in the future rather than less, including, take the smart glasses, for example. People are taking pictures and making movies with them, and you won't even know. Our cars are producing and generating a lot of data. So the next 25 years, you'll see that explosion of data continue. You'll see the training and the AI models continue. And that's why I'm saying, right, the next 10 years, I can foresee that organizations and society will really adjust to that data asset, and it will become normal, just like computers are normal for us or mobile phones are normal for us. Data will become normal for everybody in their lives. And AI will be an interface with which we interact with this data. So you don't need special skills anymore. You don't need SQL. You don't need to know about data science, because some of that intelligence that otherwise you as an individual would have to study is now going to be incorporated in that user experience that is fed by AI. And that ultimately gives you access to data and insight that has a low barrier of entry, so everybody can do it. So next 10, 15 years, this will become normalized. We will accept this as normal. And then if you add another 10 years to your prediction, like I said, then you're in science fiction land, right? So you can look at movies like Alien or whatever, and then say, how people in their ship, in their house, in their office, speak to quote unquote mother or father, speak to, Jenkins or whatever the robot is that Stark uses. So we'll have that experience embedded in our environments.
That sounds like science fiction. It is science fiction.
It's 25 years, man.
Yes. And what is happening now with data collection devices as cause, wearables. I believe that it's drastic transformation, and we live in times where as you said, like the shifting is so quick that it's quite hard to keep up. But if you don't keep up, I think that you will not really succeed in that sense.
Yes, I would argue that indeed technology changes rapidly, right? So you see a lot of advancements, on chips, on storage, on connectivity, on self-driving cars, and robots being into your household, or little super smart Tamagotchis that your kids speak to. So the technology disruption is real. There is a lot of fast pace in technology, but that does not mean that all of that technology will be relevant 5 or 10 years from now. Right? Many of those technologies will fail and fizzle because we don't deem them as useful or as good as people or society, right? So the speed of that change is ultimately not determined by the speed of the technology, but rather by the speed at which we as human beings can adopt or adjust to that new technology reality. And that is very unevenly spread. There's this quote, I forget by whom. I think it's maybe Kevin Kelly, but I'm not sure. The future is already here. It's just unevenly distributed. Let's take the example between Belgium and Estonia, right? Estonia is more in the future than Belgium is, right? Because there's a number of things that you are already more advanced in as a quote-unquote digital society compared to Belgium. Or look at the United States and Europe. By regulation or by capital, it doesn't matter, but certain of the AI technologies get used first in the United States before they even come into Europe. So the future is already here in places, but the wave with which it permeates through society is at a certain slower speed. It's not because you can make a chip that is twice as powerful and 5 times as cheap today that chip now all of a sudden is in everybody's hands around the world. Right? So it's that latter thing that determines the speed of change rather than the technical ability to make a new widget. I mean, we have a quantum processor now, but when will you have one in your phone or in your home?
I think soon.
How soon?
even 25 years. It's extremely soon.
In 25 years, you will have it. Yes.
I think it's a really fascinating episode and really interesting ideas. And it's episodes of quotes. We have a lot of quotes now.
Yes. You'll have to verify them now.
There is a notion inside the founders community that they really want to get big venture capital firms like Sequoia, like Capital G, to invest in their company, to have them on board, to have their expertise, to have their network. You have extremely high-level VC funds invested in Collibra. Can you confirm or disconfirm the need, the drive behind getting those big enterprises to invest in your startup? Do they actually bring value?
Do some of our large investors bring value? Well, we can break down value immediately. The answer is yes, right? But because let's break down value a little bit. There's financial value, right? So inevitably, the small, early, late, big investors in our organization, at a minimum, bring a financial value, right? They add a financial resource into your organization that allows you to, do things that otherwise maybe you were unable to. Maybe you can grow faster, open a new market, build a new product, whatever it is. That capital resource allows you to do that. That is value. That's the base of it. On top of that, you typically get a network effect, right? Because there's experienced founders and operators in those VC firms that you can get access to. You can ask them for their experiences. You could maybe have your plans reviewed, or maybe you could talk to another company in the portfolio that's in a similar or adjacent space, or maybe that has already done a category creation strategy and you can learn from that. So there's definitely benefits or value on top of just the financial value. But I would stress how important the individual is. So when I meet another founder, I always recommend, when you look at an investor, don't just look at the firm, but look at the person from the firm that is going to be sitting there in your board or whatever it is. Because ultimately, it's your interaction with the person that matters, not with some vague, firm. And if you don't get along with the person, or if you don't, feel comfortable asking certain questions or proposing certain ideas to the person, then the big brand investor name is not very helpful, because the person is your gatekeeper also to the other value that comes out of it. Right? You might need to work with that person for a follow-up investment, for example. And then the working relationship that you can have with that individual is more important than the name that is behind it. And that's where you go back to the old advice that we got in the early days, is that when you go on board with an investor, it's a sort of, quote unquote marriage, or rather it's a long-term relationship that you develop. Because, for example, some of our early stage investors, like Nuion in 2012, they invested in Collibra. They're Dutch, and Patrick is still there. We had our board meeting in Amsterdam in January, and Patrick is still there. So you're going from 2012 to 2025, 13 years later. So when we talk about a long-term relationship, I think 13 years qualifies as long-term already in these days, especially. So I would say definitely do look at the investor through the lens of that long-term relationship, not just today's money or tomorrow's network, but rather, okay, this is a person that I'm going to have to work with for 10 years. And then second, I would also recommend that you look at the stage that you are in. Because it's one thing to have a big brand investor name, and that might sound exciting. And maybe you have a hot topic at the moment, let's say AI, and the big brand investor wants to get a piece of your little pie, and they throw very favorable conditions at you, like high valuations and whatnot. But it is very important that you look, does the investor match my stage of company that I am at? And by that, I mean to say, am I early stage, late stage? Does the investor match my geography, right? Am I going to be able to see this person face to face from time to time? Or am I going to have to fly to another country 8 hours just to see them, right? So is there a geographical proximity? Because that facilitates collaboration. And if there isn't, are you willing to move, you or them, both? Is there a match with the industry? Is there a match with the strategy? For example, in the early days, 2013-14, Index was one of our investors. And Index literally has a category creation strategy. They invest in category creating companies. So does that match with your company? And I think that early stage aspect is so important because what's been happening is that later stage firms in the growth of startup and VC have also started to build early stage products almost. Now we also invest in early stage. But I can tell you that whenever I meet an early stage investor, they operate fundamentally different from a late stage investor. The early stage investor really looks at the people. They don't necessarily always listen to what you're saying. They're looking at your body language as to how you and the other co-founders interact with one another in the meeting. And they make their decision maybe a little bit more on gut feeling. When you and your co-founder have a conflict in the early days, which happens a lot and often leads to, failure of the company, the early stage investor is aware of these situations and can help navigate them. The late stage investor might not even be aware that this is a problem. So if you have a late stage investor and an early stage company, you're going to have a mismatch, right? You're not going to be able to help each other. It's really important to look at an investor as a partner that matches your situation and that you're going to be in, quote unquote, bed with for a prolonged period of time, not just the period of time of due diligence and then the money's on your account. No, that's when the 10 years start, right?
And if you could kind of point out the main differences between, so quote unquote, top tier investors like Sequoia, like Capital G, like Index, from the funds that are lesser known, maybe not as kind of popular in the startup community. What is the difference? What is the fundamental difference between them?
What is the difference between a good investor and a bad investor?
I would say that what is the difference between a fund that has a lot of hype around it that everybody wants to kind of get the money from? Of course, everybody wants to get money, and what is the difference from them versus the difference from maybe local Belgian startup funds that only Belgian ecosystem knows?
Right. Well, you said it yourself, right? There's a geographical aspect to it. If you have a Belgian investor and you are in Belgium, that sort of makes a lot of sense, right? Because it's here, it's available. They know you, your team, your culture, and you're operating in the same market, right? So you can help each other a lot. But let's say that you have a local Belgian investor who has never, had any experience, personal or in their portfolio, in going international, like specifically in a market like Asia Pacific or the United States. Well, then how will that investor help you in that internationalization? Mm-hmm. If that is part of your strategy, of course, as a company, right? And then maybe you have an investor who's, a big name, but has never dealt with, let's say, a Belgian startup going international. Is that useful to you? Well, maybe not, right? Maybe you want to have an investor in the middle. Maybe you want to have an investor who's worked with Belgian firms and Belgian founders before, who's worked with, Benelux markets and who's worked with Europe markets, but specifically who's helped with, those types of companies that have made a move to another market, like the UK or the United States or Asia Pacific before. So they really know the founder challenges that you are going through, they're familiar with them. They can help with them with advice and network, but they're also understanding and cognizant of the issues, so they can help you manage and navigate them. Right? If they are totally clueless about those issues, then you're going to have conflicts at board level because your challenges and their recommendations or asks just don't line up. And in the end, quite frankly, it boils down to availability, right? You might be an entrepreneur looking for big brand money, but you have no access to it, right? So in the end, your investor choice is also determined by the options that are put in front of you. So you have to do it with the capital resources that are available to you. And if you're in Belgium, then you need to look at capital resources that are operating in Belgium. Don't start dreaming of some Silicon Valley or Silicon Dragon fund. If they're not operating in this market, then what's the point? Maybe if you want that and you believe you need that, maybe you need to move, right?
Fantastic. So it all boils down to one notion that there should be a marriage between the VC fund and you as a founder, geographic, time-wise, and also position-wise. You need to be in the same kind of tunnel vision.
Yes, exactly. Well, tunnel vision, that's a good way of saying it. Yeah, a little bit in that same, perspective of the world. Yes. And then it's also availability, because remember the story I told you earlier. At a certain point in time in Collibra's history, we were short of money. We needed money, and we couldn't find it anymore in Belgium. And then we went to look for it internationally, and we found it in the Netherlands with Nuion. And just to give you an example of how important advice can be, then we said to Patrick, who is on our board still, hey, Patrick, we have a challenge that we want to talk through. We want to come to our office in Neder-Overeenbeek at that time. We want to, whiteboard you through what we're thinking, where we're at, and, how we're going to approach it. So he came and he did the session with us and gave us, advice as an investor, but also as a former operator. And I'll remember that quote forever. And he's a bit of a car fan, so he likes cars. So his metaphors are from that example. And he said at a certain point in time, and it came to get, do we get additional money into our business, external capital or not? And his metaphor was saying, well, as a founder, you are at the steering wheel. You're all in the car together. The investor is like on the passenger seat, but it is the founder who is at the steering wheel. And more importantly, when it came to capital injection, more or less, it's the founder who's seeing the curve coming or the straight line coming, right? And they're at the wheel and they control the gas pedal. So imagine the gas being more or less money, more or less gas. So if you're seeing a long straight piece coming, and you can make speed, you can make acceleration, you can make business, you can grow your business by putting more gas, by putting more capital resource on it, then you are the only one who can make that determination at the steering wheel, pushing the gas pedal. The investor cannot make that determination for you. But that advice, given as such, was very helpful to help you think through, okay, what do we have to do? Do we have to accelerate? Do we have to decelerate? Do we have to pump the brakes? What piece of road is ahead of us? And how fast do we think we can round those corners?
Fantastic. I think it's a fascinating conversation, not only to the founders, but also to investors. Let's finish off this conversation with a quick kind of blast of questions. Our podcast is called SuperHero Conversations, and we talk about superpowers as well. What do you feel is your superpower as a founder? What are you really good at? And don't be a Belgian shy founder. You can be an American, promotional founder.
What am I really good at? Well, I think there's a number of things that I'm good at. There's a number of things that I suck at too. Like, for example, don't ever ask me to do finances or legal stuff. It's not going to be great. But there's a number of other things that I am good at. So I do believe that one of my strengths is being a little bit relentless. Or in other words, I maybe don't know how to stop, which is also a dangerous superpower in some ways, but I just don't know how to stop almost. Like I just want to continue to figure it out and to keep going. And, there's the opportunity ahead. How can we get it? If one way doesn't work, will another way work? So not knowing how to stop, if that's a superpower. But over time, learning, of course, through experience, when to stop or how to adjust.
So it doesn't become a villain superpower.
Yeah, and I would stress that point. I mean, this is not specific to me necessarily, and is a very important point for every founder, which is to get that ego out of the way, right? Whether your superpower is one thing or the other, don't let it, consume you in that sense. And I did do a lot, like with the not stopping, I did do that a lot worse in the earlier days, for sure. And then also, another superpower of mine, if you will, is being able to explain things well. We have a complicated topic, and
like to a 6-year-old.
Yeah, well, I don't know if I succeeded there.
No, that was a success.
I'll check with some 6 years old whether it made sense with the Lego blocks. But yeah, not the persistence, let's say, and the ability to simply explain. Maybe those are two of my superpowers. And also seeing the human aspect of it all, I think, is also one of my abilities, which is, in the end, it is people that build the company. It is talented people. And we all have to go through a hard journey together. And I think recognizing that we're all going through that journey as people is very important. It's not just about numbers, right? It's about people who do things that result in certain numbers. Yeah.
Fantastic.
If those are superheroes,
I think
superpowers.
I think there are. They definitely are. What is your dream? Your personal dream?
You mean my personal dream for the company?
Yes.
Okay. My personal dream for the company is, that whole data opportunity that we talked about earlier, that we've been seeing in a way for 16 years. We've been seeing develop. We're seeing that it is bigger than we ever realized and still growing. Now, we're also seeing that it's going to take more time. There's probably another couple of years, if not 1 or 2 decades, of that opportunity in the data world that is unfolding. And my dream is that we are able to continue on that category creating, that we're able to continue on that category creating journey, strategy, and that we're able to capture a large portion of that opportunity. We've seen our platform evolve from the original position to the updated position and then to expanding that category. And even this year, we've seen that the category has literally expanded from just data governance to data and AI governance or data and analytics governance. So you're getting into that unified governance topic. And I know talking about governance is maybe a little bit, unsexy, or it's a little bit of boring, like the bean counters of data, if you will. But that opportunity is real and organizations do need it. So I think that's my professional dream, right? To make that happen. And in the process, seeing a lot of our talented people grow and maybe seeing some of our ex-colleagues grow on their own entrepreneurial journeys. That would be great.
And the last question. What question I have not asked you today in our conversation that you wish I would have asked?
Here's the thing. Sometimes people ask at the end, they ask like, hey, well, what advice would you give your original 2008 self? So if there's one question you didn't ask that typically gets asked, it's that question.
So what advice would you give to a 19-year-old yourself? Because I'm 19.
Okay. Yeah. So if you're 19 years old and you're taking my previous advice that the startup is, should be planned as a 10-year journey, I think it's a great time and place to start, because 19 plus 10 puts you at 29. So you have so much still to learn, so much still to experience, so much still to do, but also less limitations from life. You don't have a job to deal with yet, right? You don't have a mortgage to deal with yet. You don't have family situations, perhaps, that you would have when you're, in your 30s or in your 40s or 50s or what have you. So there's so much opportunity ahead of you and so much that your brain can still consume. So in that sense, yeah, go on the 10-year journey and learn all the lessons. Because one thing that I have seen with the startup life is that you have to count it a little bit like dog years. And I don't mean that in a negative way, but I mean it in a duration experience way. So oftentimes what happens in the startup or the scale up, a day can feel like a week, and a week can feel like a month, and a month can feel like a year. Not because it's boring or because it's hard, but because so much is happening at the same time. And in that sense, if you look at the next 10 years of your life and you're seeing that filled with dog years, 1 year is 7 years rather than normal human years, then you have so much experience that you're just soak up like a sponge, essentially. And that's great because that sets the stage for your next decade, right? So your 30s to your 40s.
Fantastic. Stijn, thank you so much for your advice to me, but also to all of the young founders, to all of the founders, maybe not only young, listening to us.
Yeah.
I think this conversation was fascinating. So thank you so much for coming. And dear listeners, if you want to meet guys like Stijn with a big vision, with category defining and category creation ideas, definitely come to Supernova. That is happening on the 27th and the 28th of March in Antwerp, Belgium. Thank you.
Thank you for coming over. See you in Antwerp.